Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, muli muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is here to celebrate her beautiful picture book. It's called Saving Berry, and our guest is Heather Barr. Before we invite Heather into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by the books by Morenike Oyunusi, Isaiah and the Orchestra of Sounds, and Chasing Butterflies. These are two wonderful books that we celebrated here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Isaiah is living the perfect and peaceful life in Baltimore when suddenly he acquires an alien resonant orchestra in his right ear. The lively story of Isaiah's battle with the unwelcome performers will keep you on the edge of your seat until the grand finale. The book offers a humorous yet serious look at tinnitus and all the challenges that Isaiah has to face because of it. It also provides information on the prevention of tinnitus and support for those living with tinnitus. And Morenike's other book, Chasing Butterflies in the Sunlight, it's a riveting, vividly descriptive, beautifully illustrated, and humorous book of stories. And it was named a finalist in the 2021 Next Generation Indie Book Awards. It gives you the look into the life of a privileged Nigerian-American child growing up in a lovely, culturally and racially diverse world on a university campus in Nigeria in the 70s. These books would be a great addition to any family library. Join us right now from right outside of our nation's capital. If you're listening to us in the United States, we have people listening all over the world. This is incredible, but I digress. Join us right now from right outside of Washington, D.C. Our guest today is here to celebrate her debut picture book. It's called Saving Berry. Please welcome to the show, Heather Barr. Hey, Heather, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. My name is Heather Barr, and I had to tell the story of Saving Berry. Berry is a Russian tortoise, and in 2019, in our backyard, we had an amazing enclosure for him. During the summer, as a teacher, I bring my pet home, Berry. He is spelled Berry because Berry loves strawberries. And my second grade students in Rockville, Maryland, named him that because we had a vote about it 6 years ago. So in 2019, he's hanging out in this amazing enclosure in our backyard by a koi pond. And it started to rain, and it rained a lot. It rained many inches, and it flooded out our basement, backyard, and first level of our house. And when we came home, we couldn't find Berry in the enclosure because the enclosure was like against the side of the house. Well, here they started to pump out our basement, and we found Berry floating on a pillow in our basement. And as you can imagine, I was extremely excited to find him alive, as well as most of Montgomery County, Maryland. This was such a big story that it was on the local news, and I decided to write a children's book about it. I'm a teacher. I love kids, and let's face it, it's a pandemic, and I wanted to write a story about something positive, something to give us all hope.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wrote the story.
Awesome. And, you know, some people listening might be thinking, well, you know, turtles and waters, but we're not talking about a turtle. We're talking about a tortoise. And tortoises are more like a desert creature, right?
Yeah, tortoises can't swim. And I always make sure that I point that out. A turtle can swim. A tortoise lives on land and they cannot swim. He should have drowned, but something made him survive and climb onto that pillow and hang on to dear life. And that's what's so great about this story, right? Where everybody's wearing masks. Everybody's worried about getting a booster shot. People are worried about getting sick. And here is a fantastic story about why you should just never give up. Because look, this tortoise, he survived and he's not very big. When you buy my book, you will see it. It's in a lot of libraries. I'm trying to get it across the country, but it is on Amazon. It is, I actually was on another podcast today in London. It is in some of the bookstores in London. It is in Barnes and Noble. It's in some Target stores online. So please go and check the book out. Yeah. It is really inspiring.
So as a teacher, you mentioned that you're a teacher and a second grade teacher. And so you are right there on the front lines. We're hearing about the damage that the pandemic has done to our kids psychologically, that many of our kids are like Barry, hanging on for dear life. Is that what you're experiencing in your classroom?
Well, in my classroom, because we have Barry, I am really unique. In my school, we have over 750 students, and during the pandemic, a lot of kids do act much more immature than they normally do. But because we have a pet in our classroom, we are the only pet in our entire building. And I find that during the pandemic, a lot of teachers do not have pets or animals in the classroom. And my students, we bring Barry out. So Barry is out on the carpet and he is walking around, and they have learned how to care for him, about bringing kale in and strawberries. And the idea of having a pet in the classroom has really relaxed everybody. And I think that it has really helped us. When we started in the beginning of the year, people were pretty anxious. A lot of the kids had a hard time keeping the masks on. And, we kind of made fun of the masks a little bit. We made a little tiny mask out of, I'm sure everybody's heard of Post-its, right? We have Post-its and write notes on them all the time. Well, we made a little mask for Barry out of a Post-it. So I think I have to have a sequel to this book because so many interesting things have happened to Barry. And it's really helped to relieve a lot of the pressure. And I highly recommend to parents, having a pet at home, because it really does help relax children a lot. It relieves that anxiety, not just in them, but I think in me too. So it's been fantastic to have him in the classroom.
Yeah. Now, I've mentioned this on the podcast a lot. I'm almost 100 years old, so I am way too old to have had a pet in my classroom. But my younger brothers did, and it was different. Back then, it was really kind of outrageous. I know a lot of parents are like, where's the parrot? What's a rabbit doing in the classroom? What was it that first inspired you to introduce a pet to your classroom?
So I started at the school that I'm at about 6 years ago. And 6 years ago, it was sort of my entry back into teaching because I have a very interesting background. I started teaching. Everyone's going to know I'm not that young. But anyway, I'm not super old. I'd say I'm middle-aged. But I started teaching in New York City, right? One of the largest school districts in the world. So I started teaching there. And yes, I taught there during the car bombing back in the 90s. Then I moved to London, England, and I lived in a fantastic place called Belsize, kind of near the Hampstead Heath. Fantastic place. They have hedgehogs. They have such a cool, unique society. And I love them because they love animals and they love people and they love being outside. So I loved being there. So when I came back to the United States, I decided to stay at home with my kids for a while. Then, so 6 years ago, when I went back to teaching, I was in a classroom that, guess what? This nature girl who loves being outside. I love to run on the Capitol Crescent Trail, and I love being outside. They put me in a classroom that had no windows. So there's a new principal now, but the old principal, I went to him and I said, I need something. And he said, what do you need? I said, I need a pet. And he said, okay, well, what do you want? And I said, I think I want a turtle. He said, well, you can't get a red ear slider, because that was one of the first things he said, because that could have salmonella. He said, what about a pet that doesn't go in water? So I went to the pet store, and when you open up my book, Saving Barry, one of the very first pages is me going to a pet store to look for a pet. And I went to look for a turtle, but I found Barry, the Russian tortoise. And 6 years ago, it was a lot easier to find a Russian tortoise. Now, because of the pandemic, there's hardly any pets in pet stores. So in addition to me having Barry, this Russian tortoise who's amazing, that I bought 6 years ago and introduced him, and my students named him Barry. The students I had 6 years ago I started off teaching first grade then. They're now in sixth grade. And so those kids feel very special because, right, their teacher wrote a book about this amazing tortoise that they named. So in the front of my book, I've dedicated it to my wonderful family and also to the school that I started out with, Lucy V. Barnsley, which also happens to be the first woman in Maryland. It was the first school named after a woman. So that's pretty famous too. Cool. And so during the pandemic, more fun things that I've done. I also have guinea pigs. They had babies, and I was giving them away to free to anyone that wanted to drive to my house and pick them up. I even delivered them to some of my students. So I wanted to make sure that every kid was feeling good when we were remote. I'm happy to say I'm in the classroom, and this past August when I went back, I'm still in. I haven't had COVID yet, thank God, but I plan on being there. And I've told my principal I love teaching in person, and it doesn't matter what disease comes up. I'll put an oxygen mask on if I have to. I think it is really important for these kids to be in the classroom, and I love it. And I feel very fortunate because I work at a profession. Is it challenging? Heck yes. But every day I get to go in and I get to do it better than I did the day before. And I work with people that feel the same way. And I just hope that parents listening realize there's a lot of teachers across America that feel the same way that I do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, my beautiful wife just retired after teaching special needs students for 34 years in the Boston Public School system. Thank you. And it is a very, very challenging job. Because she was a special needs teacher and her kids had a lot of issues that could only be addressed in schools. My wife was actually back in person in the height of remote learning, and she was happy to be there. She was scared. She took lots and lots of precautions. I think we have a picture one day with a full operating gown and a mask, and then she's behind. She kind of went overboard just for fun. But it is. We do need to remember, that our teachers are, in a lot of ways, they're kind of like first responders because they're there when, kids are in crisis, and they're the ones who are stepping in and filling the role that parents play at home, and they're actually filling the role of parent for a lot of kids who don't have parents, who are very attentive. So I want to thank you for that. As a teacher, you have a unique perspective on the value of parents reading with their kids. Can you share a little bit about that, a little bit about why you think it's so important for parents to be reading with their kids, not only when their kids are learning to read before they get to first and second grade, but continuing to read with them when they're in second and third and fifth grade?
I'm so glad you asked that, because it's really important way even before that. When your child is a baby, you should be reading to them. As they get older, reading with them, helping them. But even when they get older and they're in middle school and they don't want to be with you anymore, guess what? You should be reading and have them read next to you. And then when you're in high school and they have to read something that they really don't want to read, guess what? Get the same book and read it with them and discuss it with them and really be engaged with them. Ask them some questions. Think of things that you thought about it. It's so important. Reading really does change people's lives. And you know what? Even if you have a child that might have a learning issue, guess what? There's books on tape. Mm-hmm. Get them. Mm-hmm. Get them for your child. Put it on in the car when you're going places. Encourage that. It's okay. Everybody reads and learns differently. And it's really important for them to do it. I actually saw this weekend, I was fortunate enough to take my book to, it's an Army post called Fort Belvoir in Virginia. And they allowed me to go there. It's one of the few places I could go to. And I noticed that particular people were not even looking at books, not mine or anyone's. And I have to tell parents, take the time. If your child shows interest in a book, it doesn't matter if it's mine or not. Let them read it. And it's okay. Today, some of these Dogman graphic novels, it's all right as long as your kid is reading. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's really important.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that.
Yeah. And one of the things I learned, and it was a really valuable lesson to me. My daughter was in 8th grade and I was taking a class on media literacy. And one of the first things that came up was, don't try to ban something from your kids. They're going to see it anyways. They might not see it in your home in front of you, but they're going to see it. Instead, experience the media together with your kids. So, and that was a year that Jersey Shore was coming out. And my daughter, when she was seeing the ad, she goes, I want to see that. And my first reaction is, no way. But thankfully, I was taking that class and I said, we'll watch it together. And we did. And we talked about it. And it was eye-opening for me because I remember, she was laughing at some of the ridiculous and irresponsible things that was going on. But afterwards, when we were talking about it, I'm like, hey, what happened when Snooki did whatever? And she said, oh, that was really funny. I said, but what do you think about what she feels about herself? What do you think? And my daughter, without any prompting from me, just went on. Oh, she doesn't have any self-respect, because if she did have self-respect, she wouldn't let them talk to her like that. They wouldn't let them do this. They wouldn't let them do that. And I thought, there's something to this. And we watched it for a couple of seasons, and it just was a great way to have conversations about values. And it was wonderful. And it was much better than her sneaking off to her friend's house, watching it anyways. So if there's a book out there that you're like, I don't know if 9-year-olds need to read 50 Shades of Grey, but if there's a book that's a graphic novel and read it together with your kids, talk them through it. If it's inappropriate for them, they're probably not going to be interested in it.
Yeah, I also think it's not a bad thing to go back in the old days. We used to read fables, right? Because mm-hmm. fables are teaching you a lesson. And I think that people that are having young children and babies, fantastic books to buy those fables, because little kids, they can learn a lot from the fables. It teaches them good old-fashioned lessons, mm-hmm. and I love them. And I try to introduce a new fable to my students, my second graders, and they absolutely love the fables. They're like, this makes sense. Mm-hmm. There's right and wrong in this story, Miss Barr. I'm like, yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Awesome. You're getting it. Yeah. So don't be afraid of those. And a long time ago, when I was a child, I was engaged with Little House on the Prairie. Oh, and Laura Ingalls Wilder, her whole series of books. Those stories were they're G-rated, but you know what? They taught good lessons and they taught good values. That's what we need. We need things like that. Mm-hmm. And it's, to be honest with you, kids feel relaxed when they're reading those types of books. Sometimes when books get too complicated, it's a lot going on for them when they're little. And, you know, people take their kids to see all these action-packed movies, but there's like a lot going on in those books and movies. And sometimes it's too much for a young child. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It really is.
And you'll know that if you're experiencing it with your kid, and you can tell right away if it's something that's a little bit too much for them. You can talk about it and then suggest something that might be a little bit more satisfying and calming for the kids.
Absolutely. During this pandemic, I do hope parents listen to that part, because reading and doing things that are calm and old-fashioned is kind of what the kids need right now, to keep that anxiety, to keep depression away, to keep all those things away, because it's really important that kids be relaxed and feel good about themselves. And the old-fashioned games that all of our parents played and spent time with us doing board games, those things were beneficial because, one, you're spending time with your parents and you're reading with them and playing games. And today, with all the technology, we're not spending as much time, and they still need that time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So important.
We've said it here over and over again. You are your kid's first and most important teacher. And believe it or not, even when they tell you that they hate you, there's no one else in the world that they want to spend time with more than you.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned that you feel this calling to write a sequel to Saving Barry. Have you started work on it yet?
I actually have several ideas. Yes.
All right.
I do. I have several ideas because we have so many pets in our household. It's going to be something with Barry and his friends, I believe.
Wonderful, wonderful. I got to ask this. What's the strangest pet that you have in your house?
The strangest pet we have in our house, probably not that strange, but we have a very tiny little turtle that someone gave me because they didn't want it. And in the old days, there were these small turtles, extremely small, smaller than the palm of your hand. And in the old days, people put them in like a little tank with a palm tree. Well, we took over this little tiny turtle, and it's a she, but we call her LaGuardia, because when I lived in New York City, there were some people that were not so nice, and they destroyed a pet store in Chinatown in New York City, and they threw the pets all out on the ground. And I picked up a little tiny turtle, just like this one that was given to me, and I named it LaGuardia. But my original LaGuardia that I picked up back in the 90s is still alive. And yes. And true story. And I should write a story about my life, but I worked at a school called Buckle My Shoe. It is still in existence. It's an early childhood center in New York City, not too far from where the World Trade Center was. And I gave it to one of the teachers there, and she's now grown up and she's an adult and has kids, and she still has her LaGuardia.
Awesome.
So,
awesome.
Yeah, it's a good story.
That's wonderful. Well, we want to know where we can go. You mentioned the places that folks can buy it. It's on Amazon and a number of different bookstores. Is there a website or a place on social media that folks can go to connect with you?
Well, they can they can email me. I do have a link for Saving Barry. But they can also email me at softballplayerpa@gmail.com.
Awesome.
And they're welcome to email me, and they can ask me about Barry. But I do have a Saving Barry site, so I'll have to start to get that up and running.
Awesome. Well, we're excited. We love the fact that you spent time with us today. We've been talking to the author of Saving Barry, Heather Barr. Hey, Heather, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Danielle Clayton. She'll be here to celebrate Shattered Midnight. It's part of the Mirror series. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, we would love it if you would connect with us on social media. So many places to connect with us. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram. Of course, follow us on Pinterest, our Reading With Your Kids page on Pinterest. You can join us on Twitter, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. And of course, we would love it if you would go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. So many things you can do there. You can sign up for our free newsletter. You can visit our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read Wall of Fame authors. You can find out how we can help you celebrate your book to the world. And you can find every episode of the show right there on our homepage. Check it out today, readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Heather Barr. Please be sure to check out Saving Berry. Also want to thank our sponsor, The Books by Morenike Oyunusi. I want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.